The champagne flute shattered against marble before anyone registered the movement. Crystal shards scattered across Aurelio's floor like falling stars, each piece catching amber light from the chandeliers. The sound cut through conversation and silverware, turning heads toward the private dining room where Chicago's most dangerous man was losing control of the one thing he couldn't intimidate into submission. Nero's chain snapped taut as the pit bull lunged toward a waiter who'd approached too quickly. 70 pounds of muscle and rage strained against the leather collar, lips peeled back to expose teeth that had tasted violence. The waiter stumbled backward, his tray clattering, sending bruschetta and prosciutto sliding across polished stone. Damian Kovac didn't raise his voice. He never needed to, but the single word, Nero, carried enough weight to make grown men flinch. The dog ignored him completely, focused on the terrified server pressed against the wall. This was the fourth incident in 2 weeks, the third restaurant. The second time, someone had threatened to call animal control before recognizing who owned the beast and reconsidering. "Mr. Kovac, perhaps it would be best if—" The restaurant manager trailed off, his suggestion dying as Damien's dark eyes shifted toward him. "If what?" Damien's voice remained conversational, which made it more threatening than shouting. He stood slowly, his 6-foot frame unfolding with controlled precision. His charcoal suit remained perfect despite the chaos. "If I left? If I had my dog destroyed? Finish your thought." The manager went pale. "No, sir, I only meant, perhaps a professional trainer. I've hired 6. Damien moved toward Nero with cautious steps. 2 quit after the first session. 3 lasted a week. The last one is still in physical therapy." He didn't explain what had made Nero this way, didn't mention the scars mapping the dog's brindle coat like suffering made visible. Some stories were written clearly enough without telling. The other diners had stopped pretending to eat, watching with morbid fascination. A woman in red clutched her companion's arm. The pianist had abandoned Chopin mid-measure, hands frozen above keys. Damien reached for Nero's chain, and the dog's growl deepened, a warning that preceded violence by milliseconds. He'd learned to read those signals over 3 months since finding Nero chained in a basement that smelled like blood and fighting rings. He'd killed the men responsible, not quickly, but hadn't been able to kill the memories burned into Nero's mind. "Everyone stay still," he instructed. "Don't move. Don't make eye contact." Nero lunged. Not at the waiter, but at a server approaching from the opposite direction, her focus on balancing dishes and wine glasses, mind probably on tips and rent. She was young, maybe 23, with dark hair pulled into a practical bun and the kind of face people's eyes slid past without registering. The chain went slack as Nero covered the distance in 3 powerful bounds. Damien moved simultaneously, knowing he wouldn't reach the collar in time. The mathematics played out with cruel precision, too far, too fast, and too unaware. Porcelain shattered. The girl's eyes went wide as 70 pounds of rage bore down on her, teeth bared, the sound from Nero's throat between bark and battle cry. The room held its breath, waiting for blood and screaming. But the girl didn't scream. She didn't run or freeze or throw up defensive hands. Instead, she did something so unexpected it stopped Damien mid-stride. She dropped to one knee and lowered her eyes. Not cowering. Something else entirely. A deliberate choice to make herself smaller, less threatening, communicating in a language Nero understood better than words. Nero's charge faltered. His paws scraped marble as momentum transformed from killing lunge to cautious uncertainty. He pulled up short barely 3 feet from where she knelt, his growl shifting from attack to question. The room remained frozen. The girl's head stayed bowed, breathing steady despite nearly having her throat torn out. Her hands rested palm down on her thighs, fingers relaxed, everything communicating calm acceptance rather than fear. Nero circled once, twice, his nose working. The growl faded. His ears lifted incrementally. He moved closer, breath stirring loose strands of her hair. Then, the impossible happened. Her hand lifted, slowly, barely seeming to move. Not reaching toward Nero but offering herself to be investigated. Palm down, wrist exposed in profound vulnerability. She kept her eyes averted, body language non-threatening, breathing that same steady rhythm. Nero sniffed her hand. Once. Twice. His tail lowered fractionally. The tension in his shoulders eased. And then, with gentleness that seemed to belong to a different dog, he pressed his head against her palm. The room exhaled collectively. Damien felt something crack in his chest. Not breaking, but opening, like a rusted door remembering how hinges worked. The girl's fingers curved around Nero's ear, touch light enough to be declined, firm enough to be felt. She whispered something Damien couldn't hear. Nero's entire body softened, the savage animal receding to reveal something young and damaged and desperately lonely. "Who is she?" Damien asked. The manager found his voice. "That's Iris, sir. Iris Bellamy. Been working here about 4 months. Quiet girl. I barely notice her most shifts." Damien couldn't look away from the tableau, his violent dog pressing against this unknown waitress like she was the first safe thing he'd encountered, and the girl accepting his trust with gentleness that seemed to exist outside the harsh reality Damien inhabited. She finally lifted her eyes, not to Damien, but to Nero, making deliberate eye contact now that permission was established. They were storm cloud gray, holding something he recognized from mirrors during dark nights. The exhaustion of surviving things that should have killed you. "It's okay," she murmured. I know. I know what they did. I know why you're afraid. But you're safe now. You don't have to fight anymore." The words hit Damien behind his ribs, in the space where he kept things he refused to acknowledge. She wasn't just talking to the dog. Nero's tail moved. Not quite a wag, but the beginning of something that might remember happiness. He leaned more weight against her hand, eyes half closing in tentative peace. The restaurant staff began moving again, collecting broken dishes and resetting atmosphere. But Damien remained motionless, watching Iris stroke Nero's head with hands that understood exactly where old injuries lived. She stood slowly, movement still deliberate. Nero stayed close, looking up at her with something approaching devotion. When she turned toward Damien, her expression was unreadable. Not afraid, not impressed, just assessing. "He's been abused," she said simply. Not a question. Systematically, for a long time, they used pain to teach him everything is a threat. That attack is the only defense that trust gets you hurt. Damien's jaw tightened. "How do you know that?" Her gray eyes met his directly. "Because I know what it looks like when someone breaks something on purpose, when they take something innocent and teach it to be a weapon by making sure kindness becomes the enemy." The confession hung heavy with implications. Around them, Aurelio's returned to normal rhythm, but in their pocket of space, time suspended. "You're hired," Damien said. Iris's eyebrow lifted. "I already work here." "Not as a waitress." He gestured toward Nero. "For him. Whatever you just did, I need you to do it again. Teach him to be whatever he was before they destroyed him." "Dogs don't unlearn trauma," Iris said quietly. "They just learn there are still things worth trusting despite it. That takes time, patience, Consistency. She paused. And it requires someone willing to acknowledge that the same things that broke him exist in the world they're asking him to be safe in. The observation carried weight beyond its words. Damien understood she wasn't just talking about dog rehabilitation. I can pay whatever. I don't want your money. The interruption was soft, but absolute. Damien wasn't accustomed to refusals, especially financial ones. Iris seemed to sense his analysis. If I do this, I need complete authority over his care. No interference. No overriding my decisions. And she hesitated. I need to know you won't punish him for the trauma he's carrying. That you understand the violence isn't who he is. It's what was done to him. Something in her phrasing made Damien wonder what had been done to her. Agreed, he said. Anything else? Those storm-colored eyes held his. Yes. I need to know what you did to the people who hurt him. She wasn't asking from judgment or fear. She was asking because she needed to know if justice had been served. They didn't survive their mistakes, Damien answered, and they understood why before the end. Iris's shoulders relaxed fractionally. She nodded, accepting this as sufficient. Then we have an understanding, she said. I'll help Nero. But this isn't a transaction, Mr. Kovach. This is a commitment. If you're not prepared for what that means, the time, the setbacks, the patience, we should end this now. I don't fail at things I decide to accomplish, he said. Neither does trauma, Iris countered. It doesn't care about your determination or resources. It just exists. And healing happens on its own timeline, not yours. When can you start? He asked. Tomorrow, but not at your home or office. Somewhere neutral. Somewhere he can learn to associate with safety instead of the violence you live in. The casual acknowledgement of what his life contained should have felt like insult. Instead, it felt like honesty. I'll arrange something, he said. Where should I send the car? Iris shook her head, writing a number on his napkin. I'll meet you there. And Mr. Kovach? When you choose the location, remember that Nero needs to feel safe before he can learn anything else. That means no armed guards, no security protocols. Just space. Just time. Just the possibility that something different exists. She gave Nero one last gentle stroke, then stepped back. The dog whined softly, looking between them with confusion. Tomorrow, she promised. I'll see you tomorrow. She collected her tray and disappeared through the kitchen door like she'd never stopped being a waitress nobody noticed. Like she hadn't just accomplished what 6 professional trainers had failed to achieve. Damien stood alone with Nero, who stared at the kitchen door with pure longing. I don't know what just happened, Damien admitted quietly, but I think we just met someone who sees us for what we actually are. And I can't decide if that's the best thing or the most dangerous. Nero didn't answer, but his tail moved again with that tentative beginning of happiness. Tomorrow, Damien supposed, they'd start finding out. The warehouse sat in Pilsen, tucked between a closed auto body shop and an abandoned building. Damien had purchased it 6 months ago, intending storage conversion, but the project had stalled. Now it served a different purpose. He'd arrived an hour early, had his people sweep for hazards, and then sent them away as instructed. The space was vast and echoing, afternoon sunlight filtering through high windows to paint geometric patterns across concrete. Nero circled restlessly, uneasy in unfamiliar territory without fortress walls. The door opened at exactly 3 o'clock, and Iris Bellamy stepped through carrying a canvas bag that smelled of treats and leather. She wore jeans and a faded blue sweater instead of her uniform, her dark hair loose around her shoulders. Without the apron's anonymity, Damien could see details he'd missed. The way she moved with unconscious efficiency, slight shoulder asymmetry suggesting old injury, careful observation of exits before fully entering. She assessed him first, quick, thorough, 3 seconds that felt longer. Then her attention shifted to Nero, and something in her expression softened. "Good choice," she said, gesturing at the warehouse. Space without confinement, light without exposure, no corners for him to feel trapped in. Nero's ears perked up, body rigid with attention, but he didn't lunge. He remembered her. "Come here, Nero," Iris called softly, crouching with arms open in invitation rather than command. The dog looked at Damien first, checking permission that had been beaten into him. Damien nodded, and Nero crossed the floor with increasing speed, eventually running to press his entire weight against her legs. She laughed, genuine and unguarded. "I missed you too, even though it's only been 18 hours. Yeah, I know. Time moves differently when you're scared." Damien felt something twist uncomfortably in his chest. "So," Iris said, standing but keeping one hand on Nero's head. "Before we begin, I need to understand what you want from this. What does success look like?" "I want him to stop being afraid," Damien said, the honesty surprising him. "I want him to exist in the world without seeing everything as a threat. I want him to remember how to be a dog instead of a weapon." Iris studied him. "That's what you want for Nero. What do you want for yourself?" The question landed like a punch. Nobody asked him questions like that. "This isn't about me," he said, voice hardening. "Everything is about us," Iris countered gently. "The way we love broken things tells us what we understand about brokenness. You didn't rescue Nero because you needed a guard dog. You rescued him because you recognized something in his damage. Maybe I just don't like seeing things suffer unnecessarily." "Maybe," Iris agreed. "Or maybe you remember what it felt like when nobody stopped your suffering, when you had to save yourself. And now that you have power to be the intervention, you can't walk away without trying." The accuracy was unsettling. "How do you know that?" "Because I've seen you look at him," Iris said, scratching behind Nero's ear. "And you don't look at him like people look at pets they're training. You look at him the way people look at mirrors showing them who they used to be." The silence stretched, filled only by Nero's breathing and distant traffic. Damien had perfected revealing nothing, but this waitress seemed to see through anyway. "You didn't answer my question," Iris said. "What do you want for yourself?" Damien considered lying, but something about her patient waiting made him choose honesty. "I want to believe that things can be fixed," he said. "That damage doesn't have to be permanent, that what was broken can learn to be whole again instead of just functioning around the fractures." "That's a much harder goal than just training a dog." "I know. And it might not be possible. Some things are broken in ways that can't be unbroken. They just become something different. Still valuable, still capable of love and joy, but fundamentally changed." "I know that too, but I still want to try." Iris nodded, then smiled, small and sad. "Okay, then let's begin. But you need to understand something first." She knelt beside Nero, hands moving through his fur to trace scars. "These aren't going away. We can help him learn to live without constantly being triggered. We can create space for happiness alongside trauma. But the trauma itself? That becomes part of who he is. The question is whether it defines him or just informs him." Damien watched her fingers move carefully around old injuries. "How do you know where they hurt him?" "Because damage leaves signatures," Iris said. "You learn to read them if you've been damaged enough yourself. This scar..." She indicated his shoulder. from a chain pulled too tight too often, and this. Her finger traced his ribs. From kicks with specific intent to cause pain without death. They wanted him afraid and angry, not dead. They needed him functional for fighting. The clinical assessment made Damien's hands clench. He'd killed the men responsible, but listening to the catalog made him wish he could do it again, slower. "And you?" he asked. "What signatures do you carry?" Iris's hands stilled. For a moment he thought she'd refuse, but instead, she stood and pulled up her sweater sleeve, revealing her forearm. The scars were old, but unmistakable. Cigarette burns arranged too precisely to be accidental. 9 of them, forming an almost deliberate pattern. "He called it teaching me to be still," she said quietly, emotionless. "Every time I moved or made sound or showed resistance, another lesson." By the end, I could stay motionless for hours, could barely feel pain anymore because my system learned to shut down rather than process. Damien felt cold fury building. "Where is he now?" "Dead," Iris said simply, pulling her sleeve down. "Heart attack 6 years ago. Natural causes," which felt like the universe's particular cruelty, that he got to die in his sleep while I still wake up checking locked doors. The confession hung between them, more intimate than anything physical could be. "I'm sorry," Damien said. "Don't be. It made me who I am. And who I am is someone who can help him, because I understand what it means to be taught you're only valuable as something to hurt." The parallel was explicit now. Nero had been broken by men using pain as a tool. Iris the same way. And Damien had spent so long telling himself his childhood was different, that it had made him strong rather than damaged. "My father used belts," he heard himself say. Specifically, ones with metal buckles. He had a whole collection. Said different tools were for different lessons. I learned to read which one he was pulling and calculate how many days I'd need to hide bruising. Iris didn't respond with pity. She just nodded, accepting his truth as she'd offered hers. "Then you understand," she said. "This isn't about training Nero to obey commands. This is about teaching him the world contains different possibilities than the ones he learned. That violence isn't the only language. That vulnerability doesn't automatically equal pain." "Can that actually be taught?" Damien asked. "Or are we just managing symptoms?" Iris considered seriously. "I think it depends on whether you believe people, and dogs, are defined by the worst thing that happened to them or by what they choose after. Nero could stay violent forever, and nobody would blame him. But that doesn't mean he has to. It just means it's harder to choose differently." "And you? Did you choose differently?" A shadow crossed Iris's face. "I'm here, aren't I? Voluntarily spending time with a dangerous man and his traumatized dog, believing something good might come from it. That's either choosing differently or elaborate self-destruction. Most days I'm not sure which." The honesty was refreshing. "So what now?" Iris's expression shifted to professional focus. "Now I need to see how he responds to basic interaction, not commands. I don't care if he sits or stays. I need to understand his baseline trust, his triggers, and his capacity for positive association." She pulled out a worn tennis ball. Nero's ears perked immediately, body alert but not aggressive. "Has he ever played?" she asked. "I don't know. I've tried throwing toys, but he just stares at them like they might be threats." "Because play requires vulnerability. It requires believing that chasing something won't end with punishment, that fun exists without consequences. Those are complex concepts for someone taught the opposite." She set the ball down and stepped back. Nero approached cautiously, sniffing. body language uncertain. He looked up at Iris, then Damien, checking if this was a trap. "It's okay," Iris said softly. "It's just a ball. It can't hurt you. Neither of us will hurt you for investigating it." Nero nudged the ball. It rolled, and he jumped back, startled. Iris didn't laugh or push. She just waited, patient and still. After several moments, Nero approached again. This time, when he nudged it, he didn't jump back. He watched it roll, something like curiosity replacing fear. "Good," Iris murmured. "That's good. You're learning that some things move without meaning harm. That change can be neutral instead of dangerous." She looked at Damien, and he saw something that made his chest tighten. Hope. Fragile, but present. "This is going to work," she said. "It'll take time. It'll be hard. There will be setbacks. But he can learn this. We all can." The "we" felt significant, like she was including all three of them in transformation's possibility. Damien wanted to believe her. Wanted it with surprising intensity. Nero picked up the tennis ball, then dropped it at Iris's feet. The gesture was hesitant, questioning, like testing if this was allowed. Iris's face lit up with joy. "Yes! Good boy! You're playing!" She tossed it gently across the floor. Not far, just an invitation. Nero watched it roll, body coiled with uncertainty. Then, suddenly, he chased it. Not as a threat, as something to catch because catching could be fun. When he brought it back to Iris, his tail was wagging, truly wagging, full, uninhibited movement that spoke of approaching happiness. Damien felt something crack wider in his chest. Iris looked over at him, tears shining though she smiled. "Do you see? Do you see what he's capable of when he feels safe?" Damien did see. And in seeing Nero's transformation, he glimpsed the possibility that maybe the same applied to people. "Teach me," he said, words coming from somewhere deeper than strategy. "Teach me how to create space for that. How to be safe for something that has every reason not to trust safety." Iris studied him, then nodded. "Okay, but fair warning. Learning to be safe for others requires confronting all the ways you're not safe for yourself. All the violence you carry inside. All the ways you've taught yourself that strength means never needing, never softening, and never admitting you're damaged, too." "I know," Damien said, though he didn't. Not in the bone-deep way that would be required, but he was willing to learn. For Nero. For this strange, damaged waitress who saw too much. For the boy he'd been who'd wished someone would notice he needed saving. Maybe even for himself, though that felt like the most dangerous admission of all. 3 weeks became a rhythm. Tuesdays and Thursdays at 3 o'clock, the warehouse transformed from empty industrial space into something closer to sanctuary. Iris arrived with her canvas bag. Damien brought Nero, and for 2 hours they existed separately from the violence their lives otherwise contained. Progress was not linear. On good days, Nero played fetch with increasing enthusiasm, his body communicating joy instead of just absence of terror. He'd learned to take treats gently instead of desperate snatching. He'd even begun sitting close to Damien without the rigid posture suggesting he was prepared to bolt. On bad days, a slammed door would send him spiraling for hours. A dropped bag would trigger aggressive defensiveness. Iris never showed frustration, just infinite patience as she walked him through breathing exercises that seemed absurd until they worked. "In through your nose, out through your mouth," she'd murmur, demonstrating. "The threat has passed. You're safe. I'm here. Damien's here. Nothing is hurting you." Damien watched with increasing fascination. He'd built an empire on reading people, But Iris operated on different principles. She didn't manipulate or control. She simply witnessed. She let Nero feel what he felt without shortcutting through discomfort. "Why don't you just distract him?" Damien asked during a difficult afternoon when Nero had been pacing for 40 minutes. "Give him treats? Redirect his attention?" Iris shook her head. "Because that teaches him to suppress rather than process. The panic is information. His nervous system telling him there's unfinished business. If I distract before he works through it, he never learns he can survive the feeling. That panic doesn't last forever. That he can regulate himself instead of needing external intervention. That sounds like therapy." "It is therapy. Trauma-informed care works the same for dogs as people. The species doesn't matter." Something in her phrasing made Damien ask, "You've been in therapy. For what happened?" Not a question. Iris glanced at him, assessing, then decided on honesty. 7 years of it. Twice a week at first, then weekly, now monthly maintenance. I learned what happened wasn't my fault, that survival was its own courage, and that I could build a life beyond what he tried to reduce me to. But I also learned that healing isn't forgetting. The scars don't disappear. They just become part of the story, instead of the whole story. Damien thought about his own relationship to the past. He'd never considered therapy. Weakness was something you eliminated, not processed. But watching Iris's competent care, understanding that her capacity came from willingness to examine her own damage, made him reconsider. "Do you think I need therapy?" he asked, more vulnerable than intended. Iris's lips curved slightly. "I think everyone needs therapy, but especially people who've been taught that needing anything makes them vulnerable to exploitation. You've built safety through control and power. Therapy asks you to find safety through vulnerability and connection instead. That's terrifying for people like us." "People like us?" "You keep saying that." "Because we are together. Different details. Same core story. Someone hurt us when we were too small to fight back. We survived by becoming harder, less accessible to pain. And now we're trying to figure out if we can soften without being destroyed. Nero's just the most obvious version of that question." She crouched beside the still pacing dog. "Hey. Hey, buddy. I know you're scared. I know your body is telling you danger is everywhere. But look around. What do you actually see?" Damien is sitting still. I'm sitting still. Nothing is chasing you. You're safe right now. In this moment. Nero's pacing slowed. His breathing remained elevated, but he was listening. "That's it," Iris encouraged. "You're doing so well. This is the hard work. Staying present when everything in you wants to run or fight. Choosing to trust what you can see over what you're afraid might be true." Gradually, Nero settled. He came to Iris and pressed his head against her shoulder with enough force to make her brace herself. She wrapped her arms around him, letting him lean his full weight. "Good boy," she whispered. "You did it. You worked through it. I'm so proud of you." Damien felt something uncomfortable, lodging behind his sternum. He was watching Nero receive comfort he'd needed as a child, the acknowledgement that surviving fear was its own accomplishment, and some part of him that had never grown past 7 wanted that same recognition. As if reading his mind, Iris looked up. "You're doing well too. Showing up consistently, creating space for his healing. That's harder than it looks, especially for someone whose instinct is to fix through force." The acknowledgement hit differently than expected. Not patronizing, just genuine recognition. When was the last time someone had told him he was doing well at something that mattered? "Thank you," he said, the words rusty from disuse. They sat in silence, Iris holding Nero, Damien watching from his position against the wall. The afternoon light shifted. Somewhere outside, a car alarm went off and stopped. Life continued while they existed in this pocket of extraordinary stillness. Finally, Iris spoke. "Can I ask you something personal?" Damien tensed reflexively, but fairness demanded reciprocation. "Yes." "Why did you kill them? The men who hurt Nero? You could have just taken the dog and left. Could have called authorities. But you chose personal violence. Why?" The question was delivered without judgment, just curiosity. "Because the law doesn't punish what happened to him adequately," Damien said. "Those men would have gotten fines, maybe short jail time, then been released to do it again. The system doesn't actually protect the vulnerable, it just processes them after they've been damaged." "So you appointed yourself judge and executioner?" "Yes." "And you don't feel conflicted about that?" Damien met her eyes directly. "Would you? If you'd found him chained in that basement, surrounded by evidence of systematic torture, knowing the men responsible would face minimal consequences, would you have walked away and trusted the system?" Iris was quiet for a long moment. "No," she admitted. "I wouldn't have. I'd have wanted them to understand what they'd done, to feel even a fraction of the fear they'd created, to know with certainty they'd never hurt another living thing. Then you understand. Understanding doesn't make it right. It just makes it human. We're all capable of violence when protecting things we love. The question is whether we become what we hate in the process of fighting it." The observation was uncomfortably astute. Had he become a different version of the same monster? Had he spent so long wielding power that he'd forgotten the difference between protection and domination? "I don't know how to answer that," he said honestly. "Neither do I," Iris replied. "I used to fantasize about killing him, the man who burned me. I'd plan it in detail, how I'd make him understand, how I'd make sure he knew why. Then he died in his sleep, and I felt cheated, robbed of justice, which made me realize some part of me had become exactly what he tried to create. Someone who thought violence was the appropriate response to pain." She looked down at Nero. "That's why I do this. Why I help traumatized animals. Because they remind me that hurt things can learn to be gentle again if given the right conditions. That violence can be unlearned. That I don't have to stay the person trauma tried to make me." Damien absorbed this, thinking about his own motivations for saving Nero. He'd told himself it was about justice, about preventing further suffering. But was it actually about proving he could still care beyond strategic utility? That he wasn't completely the cold, calculating man his reputation suggested? "What if I can't unlearn it?" he asked quietly. "The violence. What if it's not something that happened to me, but something I've become?" Iris finally looked up. "Then you make a choice. Every day. Every interaction. You choose whether to use violence as first option or last resort. Whether to protect or dominate. Whether to help things heal or just prevent them from bleeding visibly." She paused. "The fact that you're asking the question suggests you haven't become it completely. People who fully embody violence don't question whether they should." The reassurance was thin, but Damien held onto it anyway. "I want to tell you something," Iris said after more silence, "about why I really agreed to help Nero." Damien waited, sensing significance. "When I saw him that night at the restaurant, when he charged at me and everyone thought he was going to tear my throat out, I wasn't afraid. I should have been. Any rational person would have been. But all I felt was recognition. I looked at him and saw myself at 17, when I'd learned to attack anyone who got too close because closeness had only ever meant pain. I saw the desperation of something hurt so badly it couldn't distinguish between threats and help anymore. Her hand tightened in Nero's fur. And when I knelt down, when I made myself small and vulnerable in front of him, I was offering him something nobody offered me until I was 23 and too damaged to accept it easily. The choice to be gentle instead of violent. The option to trust that vulnerability wouldn't be punished. Did he take it? Damien asked, though he knew. He did. And in taking it, he gave me something too. He reminded me that the first moment of choosing different isn't the hardest. It's every moment after, when old instincts scream that you're being stupid, that you're going to get hurt again, that safety is an illusion and violence is the only reliable protection. She met Damien's eyes. You asked if you need therapy, but what you're really asking is whether you can change, whether the violence you've become is permanent or just persistent. And I can't answer that for you. But I can tell you that Nero was purpose-built to be violent. He was selectively bred, systematically abused, and specifically trained to see every living thing as either threat or prey. If he can learn to play fetch and trust gentle hands, then maybe we can too. The we inclusion felt significant again. Damien wasn't just witnessing Nero's rehabilitation. He was participating in something mutual. What happens when this ends? Damien asked. When Nero is fixed or as fixed as he's going to get? Do we just stop? Go back to our separate lives? Is that what you want? No, Damien said, before he could consider whether honesty was strategically sound. I don't want this to end. These sessions are the only time I feel like I'm doing something that matters beyond maintaining power or preventing threats. Then it doesn't have to end, Iris said simply. Nero will always benefit from continued socialization. And maybe we will too. The implications hovered between them. That this had become more than dog rehabilitation, that something was developing neither had quite named but both recognized. Damien felt the pull toward it, toward her, toward connection that didn't require maintaining his carefully constructed persona. But he also felt the fear that letting someone see him fully meant giving them power to hurt him. That vulnerability was just a different form of suicide for someone in his position. I need to tell you something too, he said, deciding that if they were doing honesty, it should be complete. About my world, about what I actually do. I know what you do, Damien. I'm not naive. You don't get Nero's level of trauma from legal business ventures. Then why are you here? Why risk association with someone whose violence isn't just past, but present? Because violence isn't a monolith, Iris said. There's violence that creates suffering and violence that prevents it. Violence that dominates and violence that protects. You live in shades of gray most people refuse to acknowledge exist. That doesn't make you good, but it doesn't make you simple evil either. She stood, disengaging from Nero, who'd achieved genuine calm. I spent years being taught I deserved what happened to me, that my suffering was earned through fundamental flaw. And then I spent more years learning that wasn't true, that bad things happen to innocent people, that trauma isn't proof of unworthiness, that I could build worth beyond what was done to me. She walked toward Damien, closing the distance until she stood just feet away. You're trying to figure out if you're redeemable, if the violence makes you irredeemable, and I can't answer that. But I can tell you that showing up here, that learning patience, that creating space for something damaged to heal, those are choices. And choices matter. Maybe more than past actions do. Damien looked at her, really looked, and saw the steel beneath her quiet exterior. the strength that came from surviving things that should have destroyed her and choosing to remain capable of gentleness anyway. "I'm afraid," he admitted, "of this, of you, of what it means that I can't stop thinking about these sessions, about you, about the possibility that I might be capable of something beyond what I've been." Iris's expression softened. "Good. Fear means you care enough for stakes to exist. Fear means you're alive instead of just functioning. Fear is information, the same as Nero's panic. It's telling you something important is happening, something that could change you if you let it." She reached out slowly, giving him time to refuse. Her hand settled on his forearm, warm and solid. "I'm afraid too," she said quietly, "of trusting someone dangerous, of believing violence can be directed toward good without eventually being directed toward me, of wanting something when wanting has always meant eventual loss. But I'm here anyway. We both are. Maybe that's enough to start with." Damien felt something in his chest crack wider. He covered her hand with his own, the gesture tentative, asking permission even as it offered connection. They stood like that for a moment, two damaged people touching carefully, testing whether contact could exist without pain. Nero approached, pushing his head between them, demanding inclusion. Iris laughed. That genuine, unguarded sound Damien had learned to listen for. She crouched to include the dog, and Damien followed, all three forming a small circle on concrete. "We're quite a collection," Iris observed. "A traumatized dog, a waitress with cigarette burns, and a mafia boss who kills people but saves dogs." "Found family," Damien repeated, testing the words. He'd never had family in any real sense. His father had ensured that concept meant pain rather than safety. But this strange triangle felt closer to family than anything in his memory. "Is that what this is?" he asked. Iris met his eyes, her gaze steady and sure. "I think it could be, if we're brave enough to let it." The warehouse held its breath, waiting for his answer. "I'm brave enough to try," he said finally. Iris smiled. "Then we'll try together." Nero barked once, sharp and happy, as if agreeing. And in the fading afternoon light of a warehouse in Pilsen, three broken things began the work of becoming a family. The call came at 2 a.m. on a Thursday that had started unremarkably. Damien was still awake. Sleep had become elusive as sessions with Iris continued. His mind too active processing emotions he'd spent decades suppressing. He sat in his home office overlooking the Chicago skyline, reviewing shipping manifests, when his phone lit up with Marcus's name. Marcus didn't call at 2 a.m. unless blood had been spilled or was about to be. "Talk," Damien answered. "We have a problem. Valentin's crew has been asking questions. About the warehouse in Pilsen, about why you're there twice a week, about who the woman is." Damien's blood went cold. "What kind of questions?" "The dangerous kind. They pulled surveillance footage from the bodega across the street. Got photos. They know she's a waitress from Aurelio's, know her schedule, and know her address." "Damien. They're looking for leverage. Valentin's been testing boundaries since you took North Side territory. He thinks you've gone soft." "Valentin thinks a lot of things," Damien said, his voice dropping to the register that made smart men reconsider. "Most of them incorrectly." "Agreed. But he's not wrong that you've been distracted. And in our world, distraction gets people killed." Damien moved to the window where the city spread below, like a kingdom built on compromises with darkness. He'd known this was coming. Had known from the moment he'd allowed Iris into his life that she'd become a vulnerability. In his world, caring about anything was a liability. "What's your recommendation?" End it. The sessions, the connection, all of it. Send her somewhere safe if you want. But cut the tie before Valentine uses it to cut your throat. The suggestion was logical, strategic. Exactly what Damien would have recommended. Eliminate the vulnerability before it could be exploited. But the thought of walking away from Iris, from Nero, from the tentative family they'd begun building, it made something in his chest constrict. I need time to think. You don't have time. Valentine's moving on this. If you don't act first, he will. Damien ended the call without responding, staring at his reflection in dark glass. The man looking back was familiar. Controlled, calculating, capable of hard choices without flinching. That man had survived by cutting away anything that could be used against him. But that man had also been alone. Completely, profoundly alone in ways he'd convinced himself were strength rather than tragedy. His phone buzzed with a text. Iris. Can't sleep. Keep thinking about what Nero did today. He let that other dog sniff him at the park without lunging. 3 months ago, that would have been impossible. Progress is real. A second text. Sorry for the late message. Probably should have waited until morning. But I wanted you to know. Damien stared at the messages, at the casual intimacy of someone sharing thoughts at 2 a.m. because they assumed their audience would welcome the interruption. Nobody texted him like this. He should tell her to run, should explain that knowing him had painted a target on her back. Instead, he texted back, "That is progress. You should be proud. We should be proud." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally, we. I like that word. Good night, Damien. Good night, Iris. He set down his phone and returned to the window, calculating angles with the precision that had kept him alive through 2 decades of warfare disguised as business. Valentine was testing boundaries, but he was also providing an opportunity. Problems could be eliminated. Threats could be neutralized. The question was whether Damien was willing to do what would be necessary to protect what he was building. The answer, he realized, was yes. Absolutely yes. He'd killed for less. But that realization came with its own horror. He was willing to kill to protect the chance at healing, was willing to employ the very violence Iris was helping him examine. The contradiction felt profound, using darkness to protect light. His father's voice echoed in memory. You think you're better than this. You think you can be soft. But violence is what you are, boy. It's in your blood. Damien had spent 20 years proving his father right, had become exactly the monster predicted. But he'd also spent 3 months learning that Nero could unlearn his training, that damage didn't have to be permanent. If that was true for the dog, wasn't it possible for him too? His phone rang again. Marcus, persistence overriding protocol. I'm handling it. How? The only way that ensures she stays safe without requiring her to disappear. Silence on the line, heavy with understanding. You're going after Valentine. He made a mistake. He threatened something under my protection. That requires response. If you move against Valentine over a woman, over a dog, you'll prove his point. Everyone will see it as weakness. Let them see it however they want. But make sure they also see what happens when someone threatens what's mine. Send the message clearly. Iris Bellamy is protected, untouchable. Anyone who even looks at her wrong answers to me personally. That's a declaration. That's telling the entire organization she matters, that you care. That makes her valuable as leverage. Only if they're stupid enough to try. And if they try, they don't survive the attempt. Eventually, people learn. Marcus was quiet. You've changed. 3 months ago, you'd have cut her loose without hesitation. 3 months ago, I didn't know what I was missing. Now I do. That changes the calculation. Does she know what you are, what you're capable of, what you're about to do to keep her safe? Damien thought about Iris's careful observations, her references to the violence he lived in, her steady acceptance of his moral complexity. She knows enough. Knowing in theory is different from seeing in practice. Then we'll deal with that when it happens. But I'm not losing this, Marcus. Call the necessary people. Set up the meeting with Valentine. Make it clear this is about respect and boundaries. Damien ended the call and immediately pulled up contacts, scrolling to a number he used rarely. Victor answered on the first ring. I need comprehensive security. Iris Bellamy, waitress at Aurelio's, her apartment, her commute, and every place she goes regularly. I want invisible but absolute coverage. Anyone unusual gets flagged. She doesn't know about the protection unless it becomes necessary. Duration? Indefinite. And Victor? This is personal. You answer to me directly. Understood. I'll have a team in place by sunrise. The arrangements took 2 more hours. By the time Damien finished, dawn was breaking over Lake Michigan, painting the water in shades that reminded him of Iris's smile when Nero accomplished something new. He hadn't slept. Wouldn't sleep now. Instead, he showered and dressed in the clothes that signaled business rather than the casual wear he'd adopted for warehouse sessions. Today required armor. His phone buzzed. Iris. Good morning. Still on for Thursday session? Bringing something special for Nero, the normalcy of it. Her assumption that their schedule would continue unchanged made his chest tighten. She lived in the light, trusted that goodness was sustainable. She didn't know that darkness was gathering. He typed, Wouldn't miss it. See you at 3. The meeting with Valentine was set for 10 a.m. in a neutral location. Damien brought Marcus and 2 others, enough to make a statement without provoking immediate violence. Valentine arrived with his own people, swagger radiating from his too young face. He'd risen quickly through violence and ambition, had carved territory through ruthlessness Damien recognized. But Valentine lacked discipline that separated long survivors from spectacular burnouts. Damien, Valentine greeted, false warmth coding real calculation. Surprised you had time for this. Heard you've been busy. New hobbies. The implication was clear. Damien didn't react. Let's dispense with theater, he said, settling into his chair with controlled ease. You've been asking questions about my schedule, my activities, and people I associate with. That crosses boundaries we established when you took Northside territory. Just maintaining awareness, making sure leadership is focused. Distraction makes everyone vulnerable. My focus is my concern. Your concern is maintaining your territory without overreaching. Valentine's smile didn't reach his eyes. Everything involves me when it creates organizational vulnerability. You spending time with civilians, getting attached, that's everyone's problem. Careful, Damien said quietly, the single word carrying enough threat to make one of Valentine's men shift. You're approaching a line you don't want to cross. Or what? Valentine leaned forward, his youth making him stupid enough to challenge directly. You'll start a war over a waitress? Prove my point that you've lost your edge? The question hung in the air. Damien let the silence stretch, let everyone feel the weight of what was about to happen. You've made a fundamental miscalculation, he said finally, voice conversational but carrying absolute certainty. You've confused my evolution for weakness, confused choosing different for inability to choose violence. But here's what you don't understand. I'm more dangerous now than I was when fear was my only tool. Because now I have something to protect. And things I care about become absolutely untouchable. He leaned forward, meeting Valentine's eyes with the full force of 20 years wielding power through controlled brutality. Iris Bellamy is under my protection. The dog is under my protection. The warehouse in Pilsen is under my protection. Anyone who approaches any of those things without explicit permission answers to me personally. And when I say personally, I mean you won't disappear cleanly. You won't get the mercy of quick. You'll understand exactly why crossing me was the last mistake you made. Valentine's face had gone pale. Too late, he was realizing he'd misread the situation. This is your one warning, Damien continued. The only one you'll receive. Walk away. Forget the questions. Erase the surveillance. And pray I'm feeling generous enough to forgive the disrespect instead of making an example. He stood, Marcus and his men rising with him. We're done here. Choose wisely, Valentine. Your next move determines whether you have a future. Damien was halfway to the door when Valentine's voice called out, sharp with desperation. She makes you weak, Damien. Eventually someone will... Damien turned, his movement so sudden that Valentine's guards reached for weapons they didn't quite draw. She makes me mortal, he corrected. Makes me remember I'm human instead of just functional. But if you mistake mortality for weakness, if you confuse caring for inability, he smiled without warmth, then you'll discover very personally how wrong that assessment was. He left without waiting for response. That was a declaration, Marcus said once they were outside. It needed to be. He'll either back down or escalate, no middle ground now. I know. They reached the car. The morning sun was bright, the city moving through ordinary rhythms. Somewhere in that ordinary chaos, Iris was probably getting ready for her shift, completely unaware that her existence had just reshaped territory agreements. If he escalates, Marcus said quietly. If he goes after her, then he dies, Damien finished, publicly, painfully. And everyone understands that touching what's mine has consequences that exceed strategic calculation. Marcus nodded, accepting the inevitability. The team's in place. She's covered. Good. Damien checked his watch. 4 hours until the warehouse session. 4 hours to contain the violence he'd just set in motion. His phone buzzed. Victor. Subject secured. Apartment monitored. Daily routes covered. She had a tail this morning. Neutralized without contact. Amateur surveillance. Probably Valentine's people confirming identity. They've been informed to report back that continuing investigation is inadvisable. Damien felt something cold settle in his stomach. They'd already been watching her. Had already started the approach that could have ended with her hurt or dead or used as leverage. He'd moved just in time. He texted back. Good work. Maintain coverage. Report anything unusual directly to me. Then he opened a new message to Iris. Looking forward to this afternoon. These sessions have become the best part of my week. It was more honesty than he typically offered, more vulnerability than strategic wisdom recommended. But if he was going to protect her with violence, then she deserved to know she mattered. Her response came almost immediately. Mine too. See you soon. 3 words. Simple affirmation. But they settled in his chest like a promise that maybe the violence he was about to employ could be in service of something worth protecting. Marcus was watching him with concern and resignation. You're all in on this, aren't you? Damien met his oldest associate's eyes and told the truth. Completely. Whatever it costs. Even if the cost is her seeing what you really are? The question hit hard. Damien thought about Iris's eyes, her acceptance of his moral complexity. She'd said she knew what he was. But did she understand that the hands gentle with Nero had also ended lives without hesitation? "I guess we'll find out," he said finally. "But I'd rather have her see me clearly and choose to leave than have her die because I wasn't willing to be what I am to keep her safe." He got in the car, already planning next steps. The violence would happen, had to happen now that lines had been drawn, but it would happen in the shadows, in the spaces Iris didn't see. At least that's what he told himself. But as the car pulled away, Damien couldn't quite shake the feeling that darkness always found a way to bleed into light. That eventually, Iris would see him clearly. Not the version who showed up for warehouse sessions, but the version who just promised to make an example of anyone who threatened her. And when she did, he'd discover whether what they were building could survive the truth of what he was. Thursday's session started normally. Nero's excited recognition when Iris arrived, the familiar check-in on progress, the comfortable rhythm they'd established. But Damien noticed details Iris missed. The black SUV maintaining position 2 blocks away, Victor's subtle presence in the building across the street, the invisible net of protection. "You seem distracted," Iris observed. Nero was working on impulse control, sitting patiently while she held a treat just out of reach. The dog's entire body quivered with wanting, but he stayed still. "Work concerns," Damien said, which was true enough. The fallout from his meeting with Valentine was ongoing. Territory readjustments, alliance recalculations, the careful maneuvering required when you'd effectively declared someone under your personal protection. Iris set down the treat bag and gave Nero his reward, then turned her full attention to Damien. "Want to talk about it?" He almost said no, his default response to personal questions about business. But something about the way she asked made him reconsider. "Someone threatened something important to me," he said carefully. "I had to respond in a way that ensured it wouldn't happen again." "The business kind of threat, or the personal kind?" "Both." Iris absorbed this. "And the response? Was it the kind that requires me to not ask details?" "Probably." She nodded, accepting the boundary without pushing. "Well, I hope the important thing stays safe." "It will," Damien said with absolute certainty. "I made sure of it." They continued the session, working through exercises designed to build Nero's confidence in uncertain situations. Iris had brought unfamiliar objects, a cardboard box, an umbrella, a metal bowl, systematically exposing him while rewarding calm investigation. "The world is full of new things," she explained to Nero, "and new doesn't always mean dangerous. Sometimes it's just different. You can be curious instead of scared." Damien watched the dog approach the umbrella with cautious interest, sniffing before deciding it wasn't a threat. 3 months ago, anything unfamiliar would have triggered aggressive defensiveness. Now Nero was learning that novelty could be neutral. "He's come so far," Damien observed. "We all have," Iris corrected, glancing at him meaningfully. "This whole process has been about all 3 of us learning to exist differently than we were taught." Before Damien could respond, his phone buzzed. "Victor." "Situation developing. Valentine's car spotted 3 blocks north. He's alone. Appears to be making a statement by proximity. No immediate threat, but inadvisable to ignore." Damien's jaw tightened. The arrogance of it. Valentine showing up near the warehouse, demonstrating that he knew where to find them. It was a power play, a testing of boundaries. "I need to step outside for a minute," Damien said, already moving. "Everything okay?" Iris asked, concern creeping in. "It will be. Stay here with Nero. I'll be right back." He exited into afternoon sunlight that felt too bright for the darkness he was about to engage with. Victor materialized from shadow, expression professionally neutral. He's circling the block, trying to get your attention without directly confronting. Where exactly? Victor pointed to an intersection 2 blocks north. Just past that corner. He'll loop back in approximately 3 minutes if he maintains current pattern. Damien calculated angles. Valentine showing up here was a message. I know what matters to you. I'm not afraid. It needed response. Something proportional, but unmistakable. When he loops back, Damien instructed, intercept him. Polite, but firm. Explain that his presence in this neighborhood is noticed and unwelcome. That coincidental proximity is still proximity, and proximity is a problem I'll address with increasing severity. You want him stopped or just warned? Warned, for now, but make sure the warning includes specific details. What happens if he ignores it? How thoroughly I've thought through consequences. Victor nodded and moved off with efficient purpose. Damien remained outside, his attention split between the street where Valentine would soon be intercepted and the warehouse where Iris continued working with Nero, completely unaware. This was the contradiction he lived in now, creating space for healing while employing the darkness that healing was supposed to transcend, using violence to protect vulnerability. It felt hypocritical in ways he couldn't quite resolve. Movement at the corner. Valentine's car rolling through, slowing as if the driver wanted to be noticed. Victor stepped into the street with the confidence of someone who knew exactly how dangerous he was, forcing the vehicle to stop. The window came down, and even from this distance, Damien could see Valentine's expression shift from arrogance to uncertainty as Victor leaned in. The conversation lasted less than a minute. Victor stepped back. The car remained motionless for 3 heartbeats before finally pulling away with deliberate slowness that was supposed to look like choice rather than retreat. Victor returned. He received the message. Not happy about it, but he understood. Said he was just driving through. I explained that driving through this specific neighborhood requires explicit permission you haven't granted. He asked what happens if he doesn't ask permission. I told him. And? He went pale, made a comment about overreacting to coincidence. I clarified that in your assessment, coincidence stops being coincidental after the second occurrence, and this was the first and last free pass. He left. Will he stay gone? Victor's expression became thoughtful. From this specific location? Probably, but he'll push boundaries elsewhere. He's committed now. Backing down completely makes him look weak to his own people. This becomes a war of escalation unless someone blinks first. I don't blink. I know. Question is whether he's smart enough to figure that out before forcing you to prove it. Damien checked the time. He'd been outside for 8 minutes, long enough for Iris to notice his absence. Maintain surveillance. Document everything. If Valentine or his people come within 5 blocks of this warehouse, I want to know immediately. If they approach Iris's apartment or Aurelio's, I want to know before they arrive. Already in place? She doesn't know she's being followed? No. And I'd like to keep it that way as long as possible. Victor's expression suggested he thought that timeline was optimistic, but he nodded and disappeared back into position. Damien re-entered the warehouse to find Iris sitting cross-legged on the floor with Nero sprawled across her lap, completely relaxed. She looked up as he approached. "Work call?" she asked. "Something like that." "Must have been important. You look like you were ready to kill someone when you walked out that door." The observation was too accurate. Damien settled on the floor across from her. "How do you do it?" he asked. "Switch between the person who works at the restaurant and the person who's here? How do you separate those worlds?" I don't, Iris said simply. They're the same world. Same me. I'm just lucky that my damage manifests in ways that make me good at reading trauma in others instead of ways that make me dangerous. You think I'm dangerous. I know you're dangerous, but dangerous isn't the same as evil. You're capable of violence. That's obvious. The question is whether you control the violence or it controls you. Damien thought about Valentine's car, about Victor delivering threats, about the protection network he'd deployed without Iris's knowledge. Was that control, or just better disguised chaos? What if the answer is both? He asked quietly. What if I use violence deliberately, strategically, but it's still using me? Iris was quiet, her hand moving through Nero's fur. Then you're human. Humans are contradictions. We're capable of profound gentleness and terrible cruelty, often in the same breath. The violence shapes you, yes, but so does this. She gestured around, showing up, learning patience, creating space for healing. Both are true simultaneously. Doesn't that make me a hypocrite? Maybe. Or maybe it makes you someone who understands that the world isn't simple. That protection requires strength, and strength sometimes requires violence. The question isn't whether you're capable of darkness. We all are. The question is what you're using it for. Damien wanted to tell her then. Wanted to confess that he'd threatened to torture someone for asking questions about her. That armed guards were maintaining invisible perimeter, that he'd drawn lines in blood to keep her safe without asking if she wanted that protection. But the words stuck in his throat. I need to tell you something, he started, then stopped. Iris waited, patient and still. Someone asked questions about you, he said carefully, about why I come here, what these sessions mean, whether you make me vulnerable. I responded in ways that ensure those questions won't be asked again. Violently? Threateningly, with the implicit promise of violence if boundaries continue to be crossed. Iris absorbed this. Because they asked about me, or because asking represented disrespect to you? The question was more complicated than it appeared. Both. The disrespect matters in my world, shows weakness if I tolerate it, but mostly because the idea of anything happening to you, of you being hurt because of association with me, is intolerable. I'd burn down everything I've built before I'd allow that. That's intense. I know. Probably unhealthy from an attachment perspective. Probably. And definitely possessive in ways that most therapists would flag. Almost certainly. She was quiet for a long moment. I should be scared of that. Of the intensity, the possessiveness, the willingness to employ violence to keep me safe. All the warning signs say this is dangerous territory. You should be, Damien agreed. This is dangerous territory. I am dangerous territory. Getting involved with me means accepting that I'll respond to threats in ways most people would consider extreme. But I'm not most people, Iris said softly. I'm someone who knows what it's like when nobody protects you. When you're vulnerable and alone and hoping someone will notice you need saving. So when you tell me you've drawn lines around me that you've made me untouchable, through threat of violence. She paused. Part of me knows I should run, but a larger part feels safer than I've felt in years. The confession landed with weight neither could quite lift. This changes things, Iris continued. Knowing that your world has noticed me, that I've become a variable in equations I don't fully understand. That staying in your life means accepting protection I didn't ask for, and danger I didn't invite. It does. I need to think about whether I can live with that, Iris said. Not just for me, but for Nero. This space was supposed to be separate from violence. If that darkness is bleeding in. She trailed off. Damien felt something crack in his chest. I understand. Do you? Because I'm not running because you're dangerous. I'm considering running because I don't know if I can watch you become more of what you are in order to protect me from consequences of what you are. That's a spiral that ends in you losing whatever pieces of gentleness you're trying to salvage. What do you want me to do? He asked. Walk away? Pretend we didn't find something here that matters? I want you to understand that violence in my defense is still violence, that it still shapes you, still costs you pieces of the person trying to emerge. I want you to consider whether protecting me is worth becoming more thoroughly what you are trying to transcend. It is, Damien said without hesitation. You're worth it. This is worth it. Is it? Or am I just another thing you're trying to control? The question hit hard. Was that what this was? Control disguised as protection? I don't know, he admitted. I don't know if I can tell the difference anymore between protecting and controlling. I just know that the thought of losing this... His voice roughened. I can't do it. I won't. Iris stood, carefully dislodging Nero. I need time, Damien. Need to figure out if what we're building is strong enough to exist alongside the darkness you live in, or if proximity to you means eventually being consumed by it. How much time? I don't know. But I can't keep showing up here pretending everything is fine when people are asking questions about me because of you. That my safety requires armed guards I didn't consent to. That continuing to care about you means accepting violence as the price of protection. She collected her bag, movements efficient but not angry. Not running exactly, but definitely creating distance. Iris. I'll call you, she said, cutting off whatever he was about to say. When I've decided. But please, don't follow me. Don't have your people watch my apartment. Don't try to protect me from choices I'm capable of making for myself. Just give me space to think. She left before he could promise or protest. Nero whined, confused by her departure, looking up at Damien as if he might explain. I don't know, Damien told the dog. I don't know if she's coming back. He pulled out his phone, texting Victor. Pull all surveillance. From her apartment and routes. She wants space. Give it to her. Victor's response. That's tactically inadvisable. She's vulnerable without coverage. I know. But she asked. And her autonomy matters more than my need to control the situation. A long pause, then. Understood. Teams withdrawn. But I'm maintaining distant surveillance on Valentine. If he approaches her, you need to know. Agreed. Damien sat in the empty warehouse with Nero. 3 months of progress. 3 months of learning that healing was possible. 3 months of building something that felt like family. And he'd potentially destroyed it by being exactly what he'd always been. Someone who responded to threats with overwhelming force. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd tried to protect what they were building, but in protecting it through violence, he'd proven Iris's point, that the darkness always bled through. Nero pressed against his leg, offering comfort he'd learned to both receive and provide. Damien's hand moved automatically to the dog's head, finding familiar scars. Maybe that was the lesson. Maybe damage was permanent, but it didn't have to be definitive. Maybe you carried darkness while reaching toward light. Or maybe he was just rationalizing. His phone stayed silent. No message from Iris. No resolution. Just space. But he'd learned something in 3 months of watching Nero heal. That growth required letting go of control, trusting that good things could survive without being forced. So he sat as shadows lengthened, a dangerous man and a traumatized dog, both learning that sometimes the hardest thing was waiting to discover if what you'd built was strong enough to withstand truth. 5 days passed in silence that felt heavier than any conversation. Damien maintained distance as requested, withdrawing surveillance, resisting every instinct. The restraint required felt like its own form of violence, internal, constant, and sharp. Nero noticed the absence. He'd pace the warehouse on session days, looking for Iris with expectation that slowly transformed into confusion, and then something that looked like mourning. Damien brought him anyway, maintaining the schedule even without her presence. "She's thinking," he told the dog during Thursday's solo session. "Figuring out if we're worth the complications. I can't blame her for that calculus." Nero tilted his head, questioning. He'd learned to trust, and trust had resulted in Iris becoming essential. Now she was gone, and no amount of explanation could help the dog understand why safe things sometimes disappeared. The restaurant call came on day 6, just after midnight. Damien answered before the first ring completed. "Damien." Iris's voice was tight, controlled but carrying an undercurrent that made his entire body go alert. "I need you to come to Aurelio's. Back entrance. Don't bring anyone else." "What happened?" "Just come. Please." The line went dead. Damien was moving before conscious thought engaged, texting Victor. "Only. Going to Aurelio's. Alone. Maintain position, but don't follow." The drive took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Damien pushed every limit, his mind calculating terrible possibilities. The restaurant's back entrance was dark when he arrived. Iris stood near the dumpsters, arms wrapped around herself despite the mild spring night, her usual composure fractured. Damien was out of the car before it fully stopped, closing distance with careful urgency. "Are you hurt? Did someone—" "I'm fine," Iris interrupted, but her voice said otherwise. "Nobody hurt me. Nobody even approached. But I saw him. Valentine. He was here tonight, at the restaurant, eating dinner like it was normal, like he wasn't making a statement." Damien felt fury ignite. He'd warned Valentine explicitly. This was deliberate boundary violation. "Did he approach you?" "No. He didn't even look at me directly. But he was there, Damien. At my workplace. In my space. And I knew. I knew he was there because of you. Because I matter to you. Because my existence has somehow become a piece on a board I never agreed to play on." She was shaking now. Damien wanted to pull her close, but the space between them felt like a boundary he didn't have permission to cross. "I'm sorry," he said. "I pulled surveillance, gave you the space you asked for, but that created an opening he exploited. I should have anticipated." "That's exactly the problem," Iris interrupted. "You're apologizing for giving me autonomy, for respecting my request, because in your world, my safety requires constant management, constant vigilance, constant control." And maybe you're right. Maybe association with you means forfeiting the right to move through the world normally. Maybe this is just what loving someone like you costs. Loving. Damien repeated the word carefully. "You said loving." Iris laughed, the sound sharp and slightly hysterical. "Of course I did, because I'm an idiot who fell for a dangerous man while trying to rehabilitate a dangerous dog, and now I can't tell if what we're building is healing or just elaborate mutual destruction." She pressed her palms against her eyes. "He sat there eating pasta, Damien, smiling at the servers, leaving a generous tip, being perfectly pleasant while knowing I'd recognize the threat. And I couldn't do anything. Couldn't confront him, couldn't call the police, couldn't even let anyone see I was scared because then they'd ask questions I can't answer." "What do you want me to do?" Damien asked quietly. Give me instructions. That's just it. You can't fix it. Iris's voice rose. This isn't fixable through force or strategy. This is the reality of caring about you. This is the cost. And I have to decide if I'm willing to pay it. She was crying now, tears tracking down her face despite her obvious frustration with showing this much vulnerability. I came here tonight planning to tell you I can't do this, that the complications exceed my capacity, that I need to walk away before I'm so entangled that walking away isn't possible. But, Damien prompted, but seeing him there, seeing the smugness, the deliberate encroachment, I didn't want to run. Iris met his eyes, her gaze fierce despite the tears. I wanted to call you, wanted you to make him understand that I'm not available for intimidation games, wanted the protection I'd spent 6 days convincing myself I didn't need. She wiped at her face angrily. What does that say about me? That I claim to want autonomy but reach for you the moment independence feels dangerous? That I criticize your violence while simultaneously wanting to benefit from it? It says you're human, Damien said, finally closing the remaining distance. It says you understand that strength isn't refusing help, it's knowing when you need it. He wanted to touch her, to promise that Valentine would regret existing by morning. But first, he needed to know what she'd decided. I'm going to kill him, Damien said quietly. Not immediately, not obviously. But Valentine crossed a line tonight that can't be uncrossed. He came into your workplace knowing it was forbidden territory. That's not a test. That's a declaration. And declarations require response. Iris didn't pull away, didn't argue, just searched his face. Tell me what that means, she said. Don't sanitize it. Don't protect me from details. If I'm going to accept this, accept you, I need to understand what I'm accepting. Damien considered how much truth to offer, then chose complete honesty. It means I'll arrange an accident, something that looks natural enough to avoid investigation, but clear enough that people in my world understand it was deliberate. It means Valentine will disappear gradually, his territory absorbed, his people redistributed, his influence erased. It means I'll use violence not as a warning but as a solution. And if others come after him? Iris asked. Then they learn the same lesson, faster each time until the message is clear. You are untouchable. Not because I claim you as property, but because harming you brings consequences so severe they exceed any possible strategic benefit. You're describing becoming more of what you are, more violent, more ruthless, more thoroughly the monster. Yes, because of me. Because I choose to protect you. The motivation is mine, Iris. The responsibility is mine. You don't carry that weight. Don't I? She pulled back slightly. If I accept this, if I come back, if I choose you, knowing what you'll do, aren't I complicit? Aren't I saying my comfort matters more than human life? The question was sophisticated, cutting to ethical complexity that easy narratives ignored. Yes, he said simply. You would be complicit. Not legally. You're not ordering or participating. But morally, philosophically, you'd be accepting that your safety is purchased through violence performed on your behalf. That's the reality. That's what choosing me actually means. Iris was quiet for a long time, her mind clearly working through implications. I need you to understand something, Iris said finally. I'm not naive. I'm not some innocent who wandered into your life without understanding what you are. I knew from that first night that you were dangerous, that your world operated by different rules. That proximity to you meant accepting violence as standard operating procedure. She met his eyes directly. But there's a difference between knowing intellectually and experiencing viscerally. Between understandings you're capable of killing and watching you choose to kill. And I need to know. I need you to be completely honest with me. Are you doing this because it's necessary or because it's easy? Because violence is the only tool you trust, or because this specific situation genuinely requires this specific response? Damien thought about Valentine's calculated appearance, about how withdrawal of protection had been interpreted as weakness, about the escalation pattern if Valentine wasn't stopped. Both, he admitted. Violence is my most developed skill. It's the tool I trust because I've perfected its use. But this situation also genuinely requires permanent solution. Valentine won't stop testing, won't accept that you're off limits, will continue escalating until either he succeeds in using you as leverage or I demonstrate that trying has fatal consequences. So killing him is strategic necessity wrapped in personal preference for violence as problem solving. Yes, she nodded slowly. Okay, then do it. But I have conditions. Damien waited, willing to agree to almost anything. First, I don't want details. I don't want to know when or how or where. I just want him gone and to never think about it again. She held up a hand. Second, this doesn't become pattern. You don't get to kill everyone who makes me uncomfortable. There has to be proportionality. Agreed. Third, Iris's voice softened. You have to promise me you're still trying, still working toward being something other than just violence. That protecting me doesn't mean abandoning the possibility of healing we've been building, that you can hold both, being dangerous when necessary and gentle when possible. I promise, Damien said, meaning it completely. Iris, these past 6 days without you, without the sessions, without watching Nero's progress, without the possibility of building something different, they've been worse than anything Valentine could threaten. I'll do what's necessary to protect you, but I won't become only that. I can't. You've shown me I'm capable of more. Iris stepped closer, finally allowing proximity. Her hand came up to rest against his chest, palm flat over his heart. Then prove it, she said quietly. Kill Valentine because it's necessary. Make me safe because you can't tolerate alternatives. But then come back to the warehouse, come back to Nero, come back to me, and show me that the hands that end. Lives can still be gentle with damaged things trying to heal. Damien covered her hand with his. I can do that. Can you? Can you really separate them? Be the monster when required and the man when possible without the roles bleeding together? I don't know, but I'm willing to try. For you. For what we're building. For the possibility that maybe I can be both without being consumed by either. Iris studied his face, then leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest. I'm terrified, she whispered. Of you. Of this. Of choosing to love someone who'll kill to keep me safe. But I'm more terrified of walking away and wondering forever if we could have been something extraordinary if I'd just been brave enough to try. Damien wrapped his arms around her, holding her with careful intensity. We can be extraordinary, complicated, probably dysfunctional, but real, honest, built on actual understanding instead of comfortable illusions. They stood like that for several minutes, two damaged people holding each other in an alley, having just negotiated the terms of murder and love in the same conversation. When they separated, Iris's eyes were clearer, composure returning. I should get home. Late shift tomorrow. I'll follow you. Make sure you get there safely. Damien. Non-negotiable. You asked for autonomy, not for me to pretend threats don't exist. I can give you space without being stupid about security. Iris considered arguing, then apparently decided to pick her battles. Fine, but distance following. I don't want to see the car. Deal. She walked to her vehicle, then paused. Damien, when Valentine is handled, when this specific threat is resolved, we need to have a longer conversation about what this relationship actually is, what it means, where it's going. I know. And you need to consider whether you're ready for that conversation, whether you can commit to something real without letting your need for control destroy what we're building. I'm ready, Damien said. Or I will be. I'll do whatever work is necessary. Iris smiled, small and sad. Then I'll see you Thursday. Regular session. Bring Nero. We have more healing to do. She drove away, and Damien followed at exactly the distance requested. Victor's car appeared 2 blocks behind. When Iris safely entered her building, Damien didn't leave immediately. He sat watching her windows light up, thinking about the conversation they'd just had, about the conditional acceptance she'd offered, about the man she believed he could become. Then he pulled out his phone and texted a single word to Marcus. Proceed. The response came immediately. Target? Valentine. Make it look natural. No connection to us. Timeline. 1 week maximum. Understood. Damien set down the phone and started the drive home, his mind already compartmentalizing. One part calculating logistics, another part thinking about Thursday's session, about Nero's continued progress, about proving to Iris that he could be both dangerous and healing without contradiction destroying him. His phone buzzed. Iris. Thank you for coming, for listening, for being honest instead of telling me what you thought I wanted to hear. It matters. He texted back. Thank you for giving me another chance, for seeing me clearly and choosing to stay anyway. It matters more than you know. 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Finally. We're going to mess this up sometimes. Both of us. But maybe if we're honest about the mess, if we don't pretend away the complications, we can build something real anyway. We can. We will. He drove through sleeping Chicago, a dangerous man who'd just arranged a murder while simultaneously committing to emotional vulnerability, and for the first time in his life, the contradiction didn't feel like weakness. It felt like wholeness. 3 months after Valentine's car went off a bridge, brake failure, investigators ruled, Damien stood in the warehouse watching something he'd once thought impossible. Nero was playing with another dog, not just tolerating proximity, actually playing, full-bodied joy of 2 animals chasing each other in elaborate circles, communicating in the ancient language of play that transcended trauma. His name is Atlas, Iris said, standing close enough that her shoulder brushed Damien's arm. Belongs to my neighbor. She asked if I could socialize him. He's been nervous since a bad park experience. I figured if anyone could teach him that dogs can be safe, it's Nero. Damien watched his once violent pit bull demonstrate gentleness, adjusting his play style to match Atlas's comfort level, reading body language and responding with emotional intelligence that spoke to profound healing. He's teaching, Damien observed quietly, passing on what he learned. We all do that eventually, Iris said. If we heal enough, the damage becomes foundation for understanding damage in others, for knowing how to help instead of just how to hurt. She was right. Damien had seen it in his own transformation. The violence he'd lived in had been gradually repurposed toward protection that didn't require domination. He still ran his empire, still made hard choices, and still employed strength when situations demanded it. But something fundamental had shifted. He no longer defined himself by it. Marcus told me something interesting yesterday, Damien said. Said the organization runs smoother now than when I was micromanaging through intimidation. Said people are more loyal when protected rather than just controlled. Turns out fear isn't the most effective long-term strategy, Iris said with gentle teasing. You knew, from the beginning. Damien turned to look at her. Not careful assessment, but open observation of someone who'd earned the right to see and be seen. You looked at Nero and saw past the violence to the damage. Then you looked at me the same way. Her eyes held warmth that still surprised him with its consistency. I saw 2 survivors pretending to be monsters because monsters don't get hurt. But you were never really monsters? Just scared things that learned to bite first. Damien thought about the boy he'd been, hiding in closets, promising himself he'd become strong enough that fear would be something he caused rather than felt. He'd kept that promise, had built strength through violence, but he'd also learned that strength had other expressions. That power could protect without crushing. That being dangerous and being safe weren't contradictions. I have something for you, Iris said, reaching into her bag. She pulled out a frame containing a photograph Damien didn't remember being taken. The image showed all 3 of them. Damien sitting cross-legged, Nero sprawled across his lap, Iris beside them with her hand on the dog's head. All 3 were smiling, genuine expressions of contentment the camera had captured. When did you take this? Damien asked, studying the photograph with something close to wonder. 2 weeks ago. You were distracted teaching Nero a new command. Didn't even notice. Iris smiled. I wanted evidence that this was real. That 3 broken things actually managed to become something whole together. Damien traced the frame's edge, his throat tight with emotion he'd spent decades suppressing. We did, didn't we? Become something whole. We're becoming, Iris corrected gently. Healing isn't a destination, it's a practice we commit to daily. She was right about that too. The past 6 months hadn't been smooth progression. There had been setbacks. Days when Nero's old fears surfaced, when Damien defaulted to control because vulnerability felt too dangerous, when Iris withdrew into protective isolation because intimacy still sometimes felt like trap rather than gift. But they'd learned to navigate those setbacks together. To recognize patterns, communicate needs, offer patience instead of judgment. My therapist says I've made remarkable progress, Iris continued, settling onto the floor where they could watch the dogs play. Damien joined her, their bodies naturally arranging into comfortable proximity. Says that being in a relationship with someone actively working on himself instead of demanding I accept him as is has been transformative for my ability to trust. You're in therapy. I'm in therapy. We're both in therapy. Sometimes I think the only one of us with healthy coping mechanisms is the dog who was literally bred for violence. Iris laughed. The full, unguarded sound Damien had learned to listen for as confirmation she felt safe. Nero's been in therapy too, just a different kind. But yes, we're quite the collection of recovering trauma survivors. Her hand found his, fingers interlacing with easy familiarity. 6 months of Thursday sessions had expanded into dinner most evenings, then weekends, then the comfortable assumption of shared time that spoke to relationship rather than just regular meetings. They hadn't defined it explicitly, both too wary of labels carrying expectations they weren't sure they could meet. But the photograph told the truth. They were family. Chosen, complicated, built on honest acknowledgement of mutual damage, but family nonetheless. I love you, Damien said, the words emerging without careful calculation. I don't know if I'm saying it right. don't know if what I feel matches what other people mean. But when I imagine my life without you in it, without these sessions, without Nero, it feels wrong, incomplete, like I'd be going back to existing instead of living. Iris was quiet, her thumb moving across his knuckles. I love you too, she said finally, even though you're dangerous, even though loving you means accepting violence as part of the package, even though some part of me still waits for the other shoe to drop. What if I am the monster? Damien asked. What if this is just elaborate rationalization? Then you're a monster who shows up every Thursday without fail, Iris said. A monster who learned patience instead of just dominance. A monster who'd rather build something good than just prevent something bad. And if that's what monsters are capable of when they choose to be, then maybe the word doesn't mean what we thought it did. She leaned her head against his shoulder. Besides, I'm not exactly innocent either. I chose you, knowing what you are, knowing what you do. That makes me complicit. We're both morally compromised, but we're compromised together, which somehow feels less lonely. Nero bounded over, Atlas following with enthusiastic clumsiness. Both animals collapsed in a heap at their feet, panting and happy and completely unconcerned with complex ethical discussions. They don't care about our moral ambiguity, Damien observed. That's all any of us really want, Iris said. Someone who shows up, who stays when things get complicated, who doesn't run when they see the damage underneath. She sat up, turning to face him directly. Damien, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly, not strategically. His chest tightened reflexively, but he nodded, committing. Do you ever regret it? Saving Nero? Meeting me? Building this life that's so different from what you had before? Do you ever wish you'd just stayed in the darkness where everything was simpler? Damien thought about the question seriously, examining his motivations with careful analysis. The past 6 months had been complicated, navigating relationship dynamics, managing therapy sessions that excavated painful memories, balancing empire management with emotional availability. It would have been easier to maintain the isolation he'd perfected. But easier wasn't better. Simpler wasn't fuller. No, he said with absolute certainty. I don't regret any of it. This is harder, more complicated, requires vulnerability I'm still learning to tolerate. But it's real, Iris. For the first time in my life, I'm living instead of just surviving. I'm building instead of just maintaining. I'm connecting instead of just controlling. That's worth the difficulty. Iris's eyes shimmered with tears she didn't bother hiding. Good, because I don't regret it either. I regret that it took so long to find you, that Nero had to suffer before we could save him, that we all had to be broken before we could help each other heal. But I don't regret the choosing, the staying, the building something beautiful from damaged pieces. She kissed him then. A gentle press of lips that communicated care more than passion, connection more than desire. When they separated, both dogs were watching with intense focus animals brought to human behavior they found confusing, but accepted as pack dynamics. I think they're judging us, Damien said. Probably, but they're also happy? We're happy. Iris stood, offering her hand. Come on, I want to try something new today. She led him to the center where afternoon sunlight created a natural spotlight. From her bag, she produced 3 tennis balls, worn from months of use. You, me, and both dogs, she explained. We're going to play together. No structure, no training goals. Just play. Fun for the sake of fun. Can you do that? Damien realized he didn't know if he could. Play had never been part of his vocabulary. Childhood had been survival. Adulthood had been strategy. The concept of doing something purely for enjoyment felt foreign. But Iris was watching with patient encouragement, and Nero was already bouncing with anticipation. So Damien took the tennis ball and threw it with less force than his strength allowed, making it catchable. Nero took off after it with Atlas following, and suddenly they were all moving, throwing balls, chasing dogs, laughing at clumsy catches and exuberant retrievals. Damien found himself running, actually running, pursuing Nero who'd stolen a ball and was playing keep away with deliberate playfulness. When Nero finally let himself be caught, dropping the ball at Damien's feet with a playbow that invited more, Damien felt something crack open in his chest. Not breaking. Opening. Making space for uncomplicated happiness he'd thought was reserved for other people. "You're smiling," Iris observed, breathless from chasing Atlas. "Really smiling. Not the careful version you use in public. The real thing." "It feels strange," Damien admitted. "Good strange. Like using muscles that have atrophied from disuse." "Then we'll exercise them more," Iris said, "until smiling feels as natural as the careful control. Until joy is accessible instead of just theoretically possible." They played until the dogs were exhausted and the humans were laughing. Later, as they packed up, Damien pulled Iris close one more time. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for seeing past what I was to what I could be, for being patient while I learned, for not running when running would have been smarter." "Thank you for proving that broken things can be gentle," Iris replied. "That violence and healing can exist in the same person without contradiction destroying them. That family can be built from choice instead of just obligation." She looked down at Nero, then up at Damien. "We did something impossible, you know. We took 3 damaged survivors and built something healthy, something sustainable, something worth protecting." "We did," Damien agreed. "And we'll keep doing it. Every Thursday. Every day. For as long as it takes and then longer." As they walked out into golden afternoon light, Nero between them and Atlas following on his leash, Damien thought about how far they'd come. From that first chaotic night when a violent dog had charged a quiet waitress and somehow found safety instead of fear. From careful early sessions when trust was theoretical rather than tangible. From the complications of discovering that protection required darkness, but darkness didn't have to define everything. They were a family now. Unconventional, complicated, built on foundations most people would consider questionable, but real, honest, sustained by commitment to showing up even when it was hard, to choosing healing even when violence was easier, to believing that damaged things could still create beauty if given space and patience and love. The sun painted Chicago in shades of amber and rose, and somewhere in that beautiful, complicated city, 3 broken things walked together toward whatever came next, knowing they'd face it as family. And that was worth every difficulty, every complication, and every moment of vulnerability that healing required. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is ask for help from the most unexpected places. A traumatized dog taught a dangerous man that strength and gentleness aren't opposites. A quiet waitress showed them both that healing requires vulnerability more than perfection. And together, they proved that family isn't about being undamaged. It's about choosing to face damage together instead of suffering alone. If you enjoyed this story, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. And remember, we're all carrying damage from something. The question isn't whether we're broken, but what we choose to build from the pieces. Like, subscribe, and share if this story moved you. Until next time, keep choosing healing, even when violence feels easier, especially then.